Alright, so today is an amazing day, and no, this is not the day the camera was announced or when it came out or when it was given to all the top prospects for camera reviews. But today is an amazing day because Sony has unveiled its new Sony A7R Mark IV. And the A7R Mark IV is, in my opinion, already an amazing camera. But let's get into the specs and let's get into why I think that. Because cameras really can't update from camera to camera so quickly, can they? Well, let's think about Sony in general real quick before we get into the specs. Sony was the new kid on the block. I mean, they had been making cameras in the past before, but nobody was really giving Sony that much play. And then all of a sudden, Sony jumps into the mirrorless full-frame market with their A7, and then it really competes against, you know, Canon and Nikon. Next thing you know, they start farting out cameras left and right, and this, that, and the other. The cameras are there, and all of a sudden, in recent time, they dropped off. They didn't bring out any camera for a while, and we were like, where's the Sony A7S Mark III and Mark IV, or where's the newer installment of your cameras? Because A7S has not gotten upgraded for a while. It hasn't gotten updated in a while, and a lot of people were thinking about where it was. Well, the Sony A7S is a great camera, and everybody thought it was going to be updated from A7S Mark II to 3 because we have a third version of the A7. We also have a third version of the A7R. And so with the A7R Mark III being updated to the Mark IV and seeing what they put in this camera, everybody was surprised it was A7S, and it was like, wow, look at this camera. So let's get into the specs. We understand where Sony has been, what they have just done, what the camera they have yet to bring out in a video-centric time of year, or time in era period, time of living history. They haven't even brought out that beast, but they just dropped a really serious beast with the A7R. So let's look at it. We have the 61 megapixel sensor. Okay, first off, let's go. So 61 megapixels. Okay, we knew it was gonna be it's a megapixel beast, so it has to have a lot of megapixels. But 61 megapixels is more megapixels than I've ever seen in pretty much any camera. That of course includes the illustrious 5DSR, which I love so much, but it definitely does have a big Achilles heel and noise. 61 megapixels is hard to then you start to think about, oh, 61 megapixels, it's gotta be slow, it's gotta do this, it's gotta have a lot of noise because it's 61, 62, 61, 60 megapixels, somewhere around that range. With 61 megapixels, we get 10 frames a second out of this joker. Talk about overheating. I really hope this camera doesn't overheat, because if you get 10 frames a second with a 61 megapixel sensor, you're like, that's more than any 24 megapixel crop frame sensor from any brand on the market today, period. Sony was like, yeah, y'all can come out with whatever y'all think is going to win the market over with your mirrorless cameras, Canon and Nikon. We got this. This is our lane. And they overkill with the frames per second, because if you get a 10 frames a second camera, you have a camera that is able to process a lot more data. Even the 5D Mark IV, a camera with 30 megapixels, can't even hack that. It can't even do that at 30 megapixels. Even the D850 can't hack that at they have 40 something megapixels in a D850. It can't even hack that. Now you're talking about it has double the resolution of a 5D Mark IV, more resolution than the 5DSR, and it can almost double any given frame rate from any of those cameras. It almost doubles the frame rate taking pictures. I'm talking about 60. Oh, that's a lot. That's a lot. I mean, I thought this was gonna come out if it had 60 megapixels. I was like, oh, okay, it's probably not gonna shoot that fast. Like what, 2 frames a second? 10. That's more than this. That's exactly the same amount as the 70 Mark II. And you know how much I love me a 7D. And I'm like, okay, well, something has to be bad about this camera since it does 60 megapixels. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, why use 60 megapixels as the Achilles heel to the camera. Well, the megapixel amount tends to limit the amount of processing that it can do at one time. Now, with this being an all digital camera, it has to process the eyepiece visual and also the live view screen that you see. So it has to process a lot. Not only that, it has to take in a lot of memory and data all at once, and then at 10 frames a second. And they said you can do like 60 pictures, I think, of compressed RAW at 60 megapixels. That's crazy, man. And think about how much you can crop out of this thing. And then you have a 567 autofocus face detection system. That's just straight up bonkers. Okay, it would be one thing like the DSLRs nowadays, where they give you a whole bunch of focus points, but it's all in the center of the daggone screen. It doesn't extend to the whole screen. If you have a screen, you should be able to be like, okay, I have a screen. All of that visual is at my disposal to focus at. But that's not the case with DSLRs. With the mirrorless cameras, you can get pretty much 98%, probably like 100 at this point with the A9 being a thing on the market right now. But you get 567 autofocus points in that whole area. Now, there's one little tidbit with that you have to think about. How are you going to actually activate the exact focus points that you want? You have to have a really good focus system to activate the certain focus points, because it can be a hindrance. Now I got to check that out too myself, but it can be a hindrance to have all those focus points on the screen, and very threatening, because you looking at that camera and you're like, okay, how am I going to focus on the point that I need to when I'm doing sports photography? So we really need to go over that. But then you got the UHD or ultra high def 4K at 30 frames a second. I don't mind this, and you might be saying, well, Devin, it doesn't have a 60 frames a second. I don't mind that so much. The reason why is because out of all the manufacturers, Canon, not saying no names, Canon, you struggle to even get 4K at a reasonable visual on your camera without a terrible codec and all this codec, and then a container for your video, that on motion JPEG, taking up almost 10 times the amount of memory just for 4K on the 5D Mark IV and the 1DX Mark II. I think, the 1DX Mark II does the exact same thing. So you have this camera now that may only strip, it doesn't let you get smooth like that the slow motion that you want, but you probably have 1080p with a lot of good specs on higher frame rate. So I'm not worried about that. You probably got 120 frames a second at 1080p, or if not that, maybe 98 or 60 at least. You see what I'm saying with the Sony, because Sony has done it so many times with so many different cameras that if they strip 60p from us at 4K, they're probably saying it for the A7S Mark III or Mark IV, which they're trying to bring out. So you might think about marketing. Like if they got cameras that are separated into tiers based off of what is the beast at this and what is the beast at that, man, they got to say something for that camera. And I know that Jay Christina also said that they don't have the camera at 8. They have 8-bit, and they don't have it at 10-bit or 12-bit. Well, they're probably saving that for the A7S, because think about it, the A7S Mark III hasn't come out yet, and the A7S Mark IV hasn't come out yet. So think about how much they're trying to invest into this camera, trying to make it good. And I don't care that Sony's taking its pretty little time, because I'd rather have a good camera than a camera company that farts out a whole bunch of cameras and they're not good. Now, Sony has always made good products. They just had bad downsides, bad symptoms, or bad drawbacks. Those medicine commercials that tell you all those things that happen. They tell you the glories of their product, but they don't tell you that the battery life is going to make it overheat. The battery's going to make it overheat, and it's really, really small, and then you can't fit it in your hand, and it overheats. All the problems that Sony used to have. Also, you have eye detect eye focus, and I believe they are trying to amplify eye detect autofocus to animal eye detect autofocus. And Chelsea Northrup had it in her hands, and I remember her saying that it tried its best, and even the most minuscule situation could find the eye of any subject that she was taking pictures of, which was amazing to me, because if you have any kind of third-party lens or non-Sony lens on that camera, it will not eye detect autofocus. So the software is extremely extensive about when and where it can find eyes and what the tools you have on there to communicate with it. But you also have 26 megapixels in the APS-C crop mode. Okay, let's think about this. How many cameras have 26 megapixels and are crop frame censored on the market? Then you have the 80D, which I'm not using right now. I'm using the G7 to film, but the 80D has what 24.2 megapixels, and that's pretty much one of the best APS-C sensors that you can get from Canon, along with the 70 Mark II. But the 70 Mark II doesn't have that many megapixels. It doesn't give you the ability to crop. It doesn't give you that ability to amplify the resolution of your lenses like Sony does in this case. And then, of course, you get the dynamic range of that sensor. It's not just a crop frame sensor. It's a full frame sensor being put into crop mode. So it's pretty much going to look, if my thought process about crop mode is all it's doing is taking some software and cutting into the image. It's not going to strip things from the camera just because the camera is there. It's going to keep all the dynamic range of the camera. It's going to keep all the color sign, all the other stuff. It's not going to make it into a different camera. It's just cutting into the image a little bit. So, I mean, it makes it easier on the camera if it just cuts into the image a little bit. It's not saving as much data. It probably can, it might be able to shoot a higher buffer rate. Now it also has a 240 megapixel pixel shift technology where you can put it on a tripod and you can get. I don't necessarily like these new pixel shift technologies. Basically, you can put it on a tripod and it'll stitch multiple images together and it'll make a great image that's way more resolution than the original camera had. Yeah, you're going a little bit bonkers with megapixels. I'm not a big fan of pixel shift because that software relies on the image or the environment to be totally still. And if you're doing a landscape, think about waves. Think about moving things that are in a landscape, like blades of grass and stuff like that. Think about how many artifacts and aliasing and things that look like they're not there and they're not supposed to be there. It's going to look like a bad cloning job in Photoshop. So I don't necessarily like the 240 megapixel pixel shift unless I'm taking pictures of an extremely still thing, maybe like food or something like that. 2 SD card slots, awesome, and both of them are UHS 2, which is, it makes too much sense. Where other camera manufacturers are not giving us that, so it's kind of like, okay, that's amazing. And then of course you have the digital audio interface thing. I don't necessarily know what that is. I gotta actually put the camera in my hands. What am I going to talk to it and it talks back or it does things for me? I don't know, but it seems like a cool piece of technology. And if Sony delivered like it delivered on all this other stuff, because nobody's saying that it's having a problem with overheating or card malfunctions or anything like that, or not too much battery life, I don't mind it. Shoot, let me get my hands on it. It retails for about as much as a 5D Mark IV retail or 5D Mark V retail, about 3,000 and change, 3,500, somewhere around there. About a 5D will get you this camera. Me personally, I think this camera is the best camera ever made. And he might say, okay, that's very pretentious. That's a very big title you gave Sony right there. But no, I think this camera is the best camera ever made. And I'm not talking about the megapixels. I'm not talking about the dynamic range. I'm actually not talking about anything really, really technical that was upgraded here. I'm really talking about the mentality of the company based off of what kind of power they have and what kind of things they have at their disposal. Now, Sony is not just a camera company, so they have some kind of reserve money to put forth into their camera department. Even though they're not selling the most cameras right now, they're not selling more than Canon. But Canon doesn't seem to be innovating anything like that, and they've made their whole world about pretty much camera and camera lenses. And then they start branching off into other forms of technology, but cameras are their mainstay, and they tend to be push-offy about things. They don't tend to listen to their clients and their constituents. So I'm a Canon shooter, and I main on Canon, and I'm engrossed in the Canon lens thing right now. But Sony has made the best camera in the world because they listened to the people who needed them. They got a bigger grip on this camera. A lot of people say it's very, very beefy in the hands. It's got a nice little thumb dial that I've been wanting that thumb dial for a long time. That little nipple-y thumb dial that you can use to move the autofocus points around, because you're going to need it with 567 autofocus points, So all that, I think this is just the best camera in the world because of what they made the ultimate camera. In my opinion, they made the ultimate camera because in a world where the biggest camera companies or the most selling camera companies, the most sellingest camera companies are not really giving us everything they want. Now, Nikon is doing a decent job. I think they're doing the best they can, but they're not the biggest company. Canon is. And so I think they made it because they're doing what we want. They're doing what we need. It's a world of supply and demand, and they've met all the requirements in most people's opinion, if not exceeded in most people's needs. Now, of course, the video is not going to be there because they have to sell another camera, which is the A7S Mark III. But with that being a thing, if you have the A7, if you have the money to afford an A7S Mark III, which is about to come out, and an A7R Mark IV, you've got the camera game on lock. They probably got the same color science, so if you want to film both of them with 4K, you have so much at your disposal if you have a Sony. And I don't know, maybe it's time for me to switch over to Sony. The only thing I don't like about mirrorless cameras, specifically Sony, is when I'm looking through that eyepiece for a long period of time in a dark situation, it does something funky with my eyes. And maybe I just need some sunglasses because it's worth what they're putting in these cameras. I'm done with CenturyFX Studios, guys. Thanks for watching. What do you think about the A7R Mark IV? What do you think about the A7S Mark III? What is it going to have now? What is that low light going to be looking like? I know we're due, and I know Sony won't disappoint.